Returning home after months away on a business trip, I discovered a for sale sign in the yard. Baffled, I phoned my parents. My mother chuckled. "We've sold the house. Get a new place." Shocked, I inquired, "What about my belongings?" She snorted. "They're all gone." My sister giggled in the background. I exhaled deeply and said, "All right, but no regrets." Then I ended the call without any hesitation. Eleanor Davis couldn't recall the last time she genuinely laughed. Over time, the sparkle in her smile had faded under the weight of relentless work. Her reputation as an architect was unassailable. Her keen intuition and dependable skills had earned the unwavering trust of her clients, and her career advanced steadily. Yet outside the realm of work, her life was marred by tangled family ties that stretched back to her earliest years. Her parents were individuals who consistently put their own desires first. Her mother, Margaret, longed to dazzle at every social gathering, while her father, Harold, immersed himself in gambling and dubious investments that were nothing more than risky wagers. Both shared an evident lack of financial acumen and a callous disregard for the consequences of their actions on others. Since childhood, Margaret had often chided Eleanor, saying, "You always wear such a stern expression. You ought to let yourself enjoy life." Any concerns Eleanor raised about household finances were dismissed as dull, and her attempts to plan for the future branded her as nothing but a perpetual worrier. In stark contrast, her sister Pamela was the cherished favorite. Inheriting both her mother's allure and her father's sociability, Pamela embodied the ideal daughter in their eyes. She was given everything she desired, her missteps quickly forgiven and her successes lavishly celebrated, allowing her to live a life of luxury under their constant protection. They would remark, "Pamela is simply enjoying life, why don't you relax a little?" while quietly managing Pamela's steep credit card bills and the fallout from her imprudent decisions. In the end, most of this financial burden fell squarely on Eleanor's shoulders. The only person who truly understood Eleanor was her grandmother, Rosalind. With her gentle smile and penetrating insight, Rosalind worried about her son and daughter-in-law's reckless spending and the stark difference in how they treated their granddaughters. "You possess a unique strength that will one day see you through," Rosalind had assured her since she was 10. Rosalind's home was a sanctuary of calm, unlike the chaos of her parents' house. Each antique and worn piece of furniture carried its own story, and Eleanor loved to sit on her grandmother's knee, listening intently to the history and memories attached to every item. "Objects have souls, especially those that have been truly cherished," Rosalind would say, a belief that profoundly shaped Eleanor's philosophy as an architect. When Rosalind passed away while Eleanor was in college, her grandmothers will bequeath the house and numerous treasured items to Eleanor. Yet, her parents tried to discard most of these heirlooms as outdated. Desperate to preserve her grandmother's legacy, Eleanor fought to keep every keepsake safe, cherishing above all the blue sapphire pendant known as the Davis family jewel. "One day you will understand the true worth of this jewel," Rosalind's final words echoed in her heart. After college, Eleanor joined an architectural firm and eventually became independent. Throughout those years, she strove to maintain her family bonds, shouldering their accumulating debts, chipping in for Pamela's college fees and loan payments, and even covering her parents' medical expenses. She never asked for anything in return. She simply wished to uphold the essence of family and the memories of her beloved grandmother. 3 months earlier, Eleanor had embarked on a lengthy business trip to Europe for a landmark project that promised to redefine her career. Anxious about her home, she had asked her parents to look after it, and they had assured her cheerfully that everything would be fine. Before departing, she pressed her grandmother's pendant against her heart and whispered softly, "I will return." Her work abroad unfolded seamlessly, yet now and then she was gripped by strange bouts of anxiety, as if her grandmother's spirit were trying to convey an urgent message. On the flight home, Eleanor envisioned reuniting with her family, her emotions mixed yet filled with love, even as she longed to preserve those precious bonds. Drained from the journey, she dozed in the back seat of a taxi while familiar streets passed by. The 3-month absence had imbued her eyes with a new glow, and the majestic elm trees along Maple Street were beginning to don the colors of autumn. "We're nearly there," the driver remarked, and Eleanor smiled, savoring the anticipation of home. With her project lauded by an enthusiastic client, she now looked forward to some rest, and to a serious discussion about her parents' burgeoning financial issues. When the taxi halted in front of her home, Eleanor paused, questioning whether this was truly her address. The driver asked, "Is this the right place?" She answered in a shaky voice, and her heart sank as she beheld a large for sale sign on the lawn. Below it, the name of a real estate company and a sold sticker were clearly visible. "This must be a mistake," she murmured. After paying the fare, she stepped out, dragging her heavy suitcase. This white two-story colonial house, her inheritance from her grandmother, had always been the center of her world. Approaching the front door, she noticed the lock had been changed. Her key no longer fit. Her heart pounded as she fought off panic and immediately dialed her mother's number. After a few rings, Margaret's upbeat voice answered, "Oh, Eleanor, you're finally back. But what's with the for sale sign in front of your house?" Trying to keep her composure, Eleanor asked, "What does this mean?" Margaret's tone bubbled with excitement. "We sold the house at a great price. Sorry, but you'll have to find another place to live." Stunned, Eleanor protested. "What do you mean? The house is in my name. There's no way you could have sold it." Margaret continued nonchalantly. "Your father handled all the paperwork. There were some legal documents or something. It's done. The new owners are moving in next weekend." Alarm bells rang in Eleanor's mind as she trembled. "What happened to my possessions?" Dismissively, Margaret replied, "Oh, your outdated items were in the way. We disposed of your unworn clothes, that heap of old books, and even the box of mementos from your grandmother." Her heart sank further as memories flooded back. The wooden box that held her grandmother's mementos, family photographs, and most importantly, her grandmother's will. "And what about grandmother's pendant?" she asked, her voice shaking. From the other end, Pamela interjected, "Oh, that old relic with the blue stone? Who would ever want to wear something like that?" A call from Pamela followed. "Eleanor, you're back. We threw an amazing party. While you were away, everyone had such a wonderful time." Overwhelmed, Eleanor sank onto the front steps, feeling as if her entire world had crumbled in the past 3 months. The memory of the pendant, her grandmother's final treasure, the Davis family jewel, tightened her chest unbearably. "Aren't you angry?" Margaret then asked with a trace of nervousness. "You always help us out financially. We assumed you'd buy a new house for yourself." Besides, the sale proceeds covered Pamela's debts. Flashes of her grandmother's final day rushed back. On her deathbed, Rosalind had grasped Eleanor's hand and whispered, "Protect the Davis house," before her words faded into silence. "What debts?" Eleanor demanded. "Oh, Pamela suffered losses on some investments, and your father's medical bills have piled up," Margaret explained. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor felt a decisive break, a shattering of the cherished family bond. "I understand," she said in a strangely composed voice, "but do not regret this." "What do you mean?" Margaret laughed lightly. "I didn't expect you to be so upset. You're always so forgiving." Without another word, Eleanor ended the call. The autumn wind brushed her cheeks as she stood before the house, a place safeguarded for 3 generations and dearly loved by her grandmother until the very end. Tears welled in her eyes, then quickly dried. "I couldn't protect what truly mattered," she whispered. At that moment, her phone vibrated with a message from Deborah, one of her few friends and a skilled lawyer. "How is Europe? Let me know when you're back." Eleanor stared at the message, then slowly straightened up. "This is not the end," she declared softly yet resolutely. "It is only the beginning." Later that day, Eleanor visited Deborah Schwartz's law office on the 5th floor of an old stone building in the town center. At reception, the secretary Janet looked up in surprise. "Eleanor, when did you return?" Offering a tired smile, Eleanor replied, "Yesterday. Is Deborah available? I have an urgent matter." Sensing the gravity in her tone, Janet quickly rang Deborah over the intercom. Moments later, Eleanor was led into Deborah's office. "It's been 3 months," Deborah said as she rose to embrace her, but her expression quickly darkened upon seeing Eleanor's distress. "What happened?" she asked. Eleanor recounted every detail of the previous day. Deborah listened intently, jotting down notes and occasionally frowning. "So, your parents sold your house without your consent and disposed of all your belongings?" Deborah summarized. "But the house was in your name. It was left to you in your grandmother's will, wasn't it? Eleanor nodded. Yet my mother claimed that your father managed all the paperwork and that some legal documents were involved. Deborah pondered. Transferring property ownership requires formal procedures. It should be impossible without your signature. She began typing on her computer. Let me check the property records. A few minutes later, her expression shifted. Eleanor, according to these records, the ownership was transferred from you to your parents 5 years ago. In a trembling voice, Eleanor exclaimed, That's impossible. I never signed anything. Deborah turned the screen toward her. There is a signature here as well. Eleanor examined it. The signature was present, but it was unmistakably not hers. This is a forgery, she declared. Deborah nodded quietly. That seems very likely. Do you have a copy of your grandmother's will? Eleanor's face hardened. I kept it in the wooden box, but my parents claimed they threw everything away. It might still be recovered, though. Calmly, Deborah said. First, we must prove that the property transfer was fraudulent. We need compelling evidence. How can we do that? Perplexed, Eleanor suggested. Let's contact the lawyer who handled your grandmother's will. They should have a copy. Deborah made the call and added, We also need to trace what happened to your belongings from that day. Thus began Eleanor's legal battle, with Deborah guiding her every step. They managed to locate the law firm that had overseen her grandmother Rosalind's will, only to hit another obstacle. I'm sorry, but several of our files were destroyed in a fire 5 years ago, the elderly lawyer Morris informed them. Mrs. Davis's will was among those lost. Deborah and Eleanor exchanged a knowing glance as they braced themselves for the next step. It all began with an eerie sense of coincidence that felt too orchestrated to be mere chance. Are there any additional records? Deborah asked, while Morris hesitated before replying. Mrs. Rosalind was exceptionally cautious. She likely deposited a copy of her will with a notary public. Spurred by this possibility, the two embarked on a fresh search. At the same time, Eleanor was determined to locate the belongings her parents had supposedly discarded. You should check with local antique shops and charitable organizations, Deborah advised, reasoning that if her parents had disposed of her possessions, some trace of them must still exist. Night after night, Eleanor made endless phone calls to various shops and institutions, painstakingly describing each cherished item in detail. Her descriptions were especially vivid when it came to her grandmother's pendant, a blue sapphire set in delicate silver filigree, with the initials RD etched on its back. On the third evening of her search, an unexpected call came through. Is this Eleanor Davis? A deep, unfamiliar voice inquired. I'm Martin Greenberg, owner of Treasures of the Past. Some items you're looking for might have been delivered to our shop. The very next morning, accompanied by Deborah, Eleanor visited the antique store. Martin, a white-haired proprietor, brought forward a large cardboard box from the back room. A gentleman and a young woman dropped these off last week. They claimed they were old items they no longer needed, he explained. Eleanor carefully opened the box and found among its contents her old photo albums, her grandmother's keepsake box, and diaries from her student days. I didn't purchase them as I didn't think they held much value, but I couldn't bear to see them thrown away. Then I noticed your advertisement, Martin added. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she thanked him, though her most treasured item, the blue sapphire pendant, was missing. Instead, inside the box she discovered her grandmother's jewelry box. Lacking a key, Eleanor managed to open it with a thin pin, revealing a trove of old photographs and an envelope. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and found a letter written in her grandmother's own hand, along with copies of legal documents. The letter read, Dear Eleanor, when you read these words you may be facing hardships. This house and all its property belongs solely to you, regardless of what Harold and Margaret claim. The enclosed documents stand as proof. I have always believed in your strength. With love, Rosalind. Deborah examined the documents intently, her eyes lighting up. This is conclusive evidence, a formal certificate of transfer, dated well before any of the forged papers appeared, she remarked. As Eleanor picked up a photograph of her grandmother, it felt as though Rosalind's wise gaze continued to watch over her. I feared that someday my parents might try something like this, Deborah said with firm resolve. Now we must take the next step. Challenge the fraudulent sale and reclaim your home. In due course, Deborah presented Eleanor with a court notice declaring that the sale contract was null and void, having been based on a fraudulent transfer of ownership. Looking out the office window, Eleanor observed how deeply autumn had set in, with trees ablaze in red and yellow. The court's decision had taken over a month, during which time Eleanor had lived in a hotel, gathering pieces of her lost past. "Will the buyer be liable for damages?" she asked anxiously. "There's no need on your part," Deborah reassured her. "The court has determined that the real estate agent involved, and your father, who allegedly forged your signature, will be held responsible." Eleanor was struck silent. She never meant to harbor resentment, yet the betrayal cut deep. Shortly after, Deborah handed Eleanor an envelope containing the keys to her house. "These keys are far more than a way in. They're a symbol of reclaiming your life," Deborah said. Overwhelmed, Eleanor embraced her friend. "Thank you, Deborah. Without you, I would have been lost." Deborah squeezed her shoulder gently. "Your grandmother always knew you had the strength to overcome," she replied. At that moment, Eleanor's cell phone rang, displaying her mother's name. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Eleanor, what have you done? We've just received a notice from the court. I can't believe the sale has been reversed. The buyers were already preparing to move in." Her mother's voice trembled. Calmly, Eleanor responded, "Mom, the house is in my name. The court confirmed that Dad forged my signature to transfer ownership." Margaret's voice faltered, and soon her father's low tone could be heard joining the conversation. "Eleanor, let's talk this through. Selling your house without your consent was wrong, but we had our reasons." Pressing for clarity, Eleanor demanded, "What reasons? And why dispose of all my precious memories?" After a pause, her father admitted quietly, "We needed the money. Pamela had amassed large debts, and my own medical bills were overwhelming." A trace of sadness seeped into Eleanor's voice as she reminded him, "I've always been there to help, haven't I?" Margaret began making excuses, adding that Eleanor was always quick to find fault. "When have I ever blamed you?" Eleanor interjected, her voice rising in disbelief before she cut herself off, realizing further argument would be futile. "Regardless, the house has been returned to me. I'm coming to get it now. But what about everything else?" Margaret's voice quavered as she admitted, "We already spent the proceeds from the sale." For a moment, Eleanor was silent, recalling that before her trip she had planned to cover Dad's expenses and the mounting debts. But now, rebuilding trust would take time. After ending the call, Eleanor hailed a taxi to her home. When the driver dropped her off, she paused at the entrance. The for sale sign still hung there, though the sold sticker had been removed. Inserting her key and unlocking the door, she stepped inside to find an empty house. The furniture was gone, and the photos that once adorned the walls had vanished. Slowly, she wandered through the silent rooms, feeling the stark emptiness but gradually regaining her composure. "This is my home," she murmured. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, she found her sister Pamela standing there, eyes red and makeup smeared. "May I come in?" Pamela asked softly. Without a word, Eleanor stepped aside and allowed her sister to enter the barren living room. Pamela apologized in a trembling voice. "I'm sorry for discarding your things, for what I said on the phone, everything." Eleanor remained silent. "Our parents were in serious trouble," Pamela continued, tears welling up. "I lost a lot of money at the casino, and Dad's heart surgery cost a fortune." Yet that did little to comfort Eleanor, who finally asked, "What happened to grandmother's pendant?" Lowering her gaze, Pamela confessed, "I sold it to a high-end jewelry store." The news struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Her most treasured keepsake, the Davis family jewel, was lost. "Which store?" she whispered. "I believe it was Green's Jewelry," Pamela replied softly, "though it might already have been sold." Eleanor moved silently to the window, where the setting sun painted the western sky a deep red. "There's one more thing," Pamela added hesitantly. "Our parents mentioned they might see you about this, but I'll try to stop them." Turning toward her sister, Eleanor said, "You've done more than enough for us." Tears glistened in Pamela's eyes as she murmured, "I should have realized it sooner." That night, Eleanor slept on a mattress on the bare floor of her empty home, finding a strange peace in the solitude. Tomorrow, she resolved, she would purchase new furniture and slowly reclaim her space. The following morning, Eleanor visited Green's jewelry. After hearing her story, the proprietor, Joseph Green, shook his head in dismay. The pendant was sold to a collector last week. It fetched a high price because it's such a rare sapphire. Although Eleanor's hope faltered, Joseph continued, "Let me speak with the buyer and explain your situation." 3 days later, Joseph contacted her with promising news. The collector had understood the circumstances and agreed to return the pendant, provided a full refund of the purchase price was arranged. Without hesitation, Eleanor agreed. On the day she received the pendant, Eleanor stood before her grandmother's photograph and held the blue sapphire close to her heart. "Grandma Rosalind, I have protected your home," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks, not of sorrow but of release. Through this turbulent journey, she had rediscovered the true meaning of family. That while blood ties are significant, without trust, respect, and genuine care, they can become hollow. With renewed determination, she fastened the pendant around her neck and welcomed the morning sunlight, ready to step into a new chapter, no matter the challenges ahead. A year later, in the spring, the white colonial house on Maple Street had been transformed entirely. Employing her skills as an architect, Eleanor renovated her grandmother's home, converting the first floor into her personal design studio. Bathed in natural light, the spacious office showcased her design drawings and models, drawing aspiring architects who sought inspiration. "Your next client is at 2, her assistant Kate announced as she handed over the schedule. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, glancing out the window at the roses her grandmother had adored, now beginning to bloom once more. This transformation marked a pivotal new direction in her life, the establishment of the Rosalind Foundation, a small organization Eleanor created to help those who, like her, had lost precious mementos. Deborah, ever the reliable lawyer, joined the initiative by offering legal support. "We've had 3 new inquiries this week," she reported at their last meeting, all involving similar cases of family members improperly disposing of cherished property. Over the past year, Eleanor had encountered many people with similar stories, which eventually led to the formation of a supportive community. Monthly gatherings at her home filled the rooms with warm conversations and laughter. Meanwhile, the circumstances with her parents and sister had taken a dramatic turn. Harold and Margaret were held accountable for the fraudulent transaction and forced to pay substantial compensation, causing their once lavish lifestyle to collapse. 3 months earlier, Margaret had called and asked, "Would you come for Christmas dinner? We all want to see you." But the wounds were still too fresh for Eleanor, so she declined. Instead, she sent a small gift to her parents, a photograph of her grandmother accompanied by a short letter reading, "Someday we may be able to talk again." It wasn't complete forgiveness, but it marked a modest beginning. That very evening, Eleanor had a special plan. She was set to launch a new project with members of the Rosalind Foundation to track down lost mementos by monitoring online antique dealers and auction sites. Lying on her desk was the blue sapphire pendant. Eleanor picked it up, holding it to the light as she whispered, "A new beginning." On a nearby shelf, her recovered photo albums, remnants of her grandmother's past, were carefully arranged. Opening one album, she gazed at a youthful image of Rosalind's smile and reflected, "Beginnings and endings are defined by the choices we make." Outside, a gentle spring breeze carried whispers of new life, and with a soft smile, Eleanor fastened the pendant around her neck, ready to continue her journey. And the months that followed the court's decisive ruling, Eleanor dedicated herself to restoring not only the Davis house but also the fragments of her past that had been shattered by betrayal. Each day, as she supervised the renovations of the white colonial home, memories of her grandmother Rosalind mingled with the fresh determination that now fueled her every decision. The peeling wallpaper was replaced by gentle pastel hues, and long-forgotten family portraits were carefully rehung alongside newly commissioned artworks that celebrated resilience and hope. Eleanor's architectural office, now occupying the sunlit first floor of the restored home, became a haven for creativity and healing. Her daily routine, which had once been filled with long hours and solitary work, transformed into a series of community gatherings. Aspiring architects and local artists found inspiration not only in her designs, but also in the story that had reshaped her life. In monthly meetings held in the refurbished drawing room, Eleanor shared her journey, encouraging others who had suffered loss or betrayal to reclaim their own lives. One crisp autumn afternoon, As Eleanor reviewed design plans in her office, her phone buzzed with an unexpected call. It was Pamela. The tone in her sister's voice was tentative, laced with remorse. "Eleanor, I've been thinking. I'm so sorry for everything. I never realized how much my actions hurt you until now." Eleanor paused, recalling the painful moment when Pamela had nonchalantly confessed to selling the cherished blue sapphire pendant. "Pamela," she replied softly, "it took everything I had not only to get the house back but to understand that our family is more than just blood. It's about trust, respect, and care. I forgive you, but we both have a long road ahead to rebuild what was broken." Their conversation ended with an unspoken promise to meet and begin mending their relationship. Meanwhile, Deborah maintained her role as both Eleanor's trusted lawyer and steadfast friend. At one of the monthly gatherings of the Rosalind Foundation, a small organization Eleanor had established to support those who had lost precious memories, Deborah delivered a stirring speech. "Our legal battles remind us that truth and justice are worth fighting for, and that even when systems fail us, our determination can reclaim what is rightfully ours." Her words resonated deeply with the attendees, many of whom had endured similar losses in family disputes or fraudulent dealings. The foundation slowly grew into a network of support, offering legal aid, counseling, and community outreach. As the seasons changed, the restored house itself began to embody the promise of renewal. Spring arrived with a burst of color. Roses, which Rosalind had once adored, now framed the windows of the house in a riot of red and pink. Neighbors, curious about the transformation, started sharing kind words and stories of their own family histories. The community began to heal alongside Eleanor, with local antique dealers and charitable organizations joining forces to locate lost mementos and return them to families whose memories were at risk. A turning point came during a celebratory event at the Davis house one bright, chilly evening. Eleanor had organized an exhibition featuring the recovered artifacts, from faded photo albums and delicate jewelry, boxes to handwritten letters and legal documents that had helped reclaim her legacy. The centerpiece was, of course, the blue sapphire pendant. Restored to its rightful owner through a series of negotiations and backed by the genuine remorse of those who had wronged her, the pendant gleamed as a testament to strength and endurance. Standing before a gathered crowd of supporters, Eleanor recounted her journey. "I once thought that the betrayal of those closest to me would leave me forever alone in the dark," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But I have learned that pain can lead to rebirth. Our memories, though fragile, hold within them the power to rebuild our lives." During the event, her parents unexpectedly appeared. Margaret's eyes were no longer clouded with arrogance but filled with regret, and Harold's voice trembled as he apologized for the choices that had cost Eleanor so dearly. While Eleanor's heart ached at the sight of their contrite faces, she knew that true healing required honesty and accountability. "I appreciate your apology," she said calmly, "but I must move forward in my own way. The house, the memories, and the foundation represent not just what we lost, but what we can rebuild when we embrace the truth." Though the reconciliation was tentative and the wounds not entirely healed, it marked the beginning of a long overdue dialogue between them, a conversation that promised, if not immediate unity, then at least the chance for understanding. In the quiet moments that followed the celebration, as twilight deepened into a starry night, Eleanor sat on the back porch of her reclaimed home. The gentle rustling of leaves and the soft hum of distant voices filled the air with a peaceful melody. In that solitude, she reflected on the long journey that had led her here, from the betrayal and legal battles to the painful confrontations with her family, and ultimately to a community reborn in trust and support. With the blue sapphire pendant resting against her heart, she whispered a final promise to her late grandmother. "Grandma Rosalind, I have protected your home and rebuilt not just a structure, but a legacy of truth and love. I will carry your spirit forward in every brick, every memory, and every new beginning." Eleanor's story, once marked by deception and heartache, had transformed into a powerful narrative of redemption and resilience. The Davis house, now a beacon of hope on Maple Street, stood as a reminder that while our past may be marred by mistakes and betrayals, it is our capacity for forgiveness and reinvention that truly defines us. And as the first light of a new day crept over the horizon, Eleanor embraced the promise of tomorrow, a future where family, though imperfect, could be rebuilt on the foundations of trust, respect, and enduring love.